Yeah, so just as a way of an introduction, a lot of you have been on these webinars before, so you will know me, but just in case you don't, my name is Lawrence. I'm the guy in the picture there. I'm a property investor, speaker, and coach, an author, a digital entrepreneur, the founder of My Property app, which is this tool behind me, and an expert when it comes to student accommodation within the South African context. So, yeah, the reason why I'm hosting this webinar, we do this with our My Property app users all the time, is part of our education to helping and empowering people to becoming property investors. If you do want to get a copy of my book, this is the book, Financial Freedom Through Property. You can get it at any bookstore, exclusive books around South Africa. There are also e-copies available, so just search that name, Financial Freedom Through Property by Lawrence Bull, and you can get yourself a copy. Now, there are two golden rules that I always start with. The first one, and this one is probably the most important, is that without action, there is no success. Now, what I'm going to take you through in the next 45 minutes is really the fundamentals of investing in student accommodation. But this knowledge is going to be useless if you don't go out there and apply it, go look at properties, go view properties, go meet estate agents, go spend time at investor networking meetings. If you want to get a passive income stream, if you want property to become a business, you need to give it that business attention. Because if you give it hobby energy, you're going to get hobby results, hobby-like results. The second golden rule is, in order to succeed, you must add value. And this is so important in property. If you look at the flip strategy, which is to buy low, force the value of the property go up by renovating it and then selling it here at a premium profit, making a nice difference between what you bought it for versus what you sold it for, and you're making a profit. The way that strategy works is by finding a distressed house, adding value to the property to bring it up in value. If you look at student accommodation, you need to add value to the student accommodation in order for your tenants to pay more. So more Wi-Fi, more security controls, whatever it is that students are looking for, that's a way in which we can push the value of the property up. And in business, you only succeed by adding more value. Okay, so welcome to the student accommodation webinar about how to invest in South Africa. Our agenda is very simple. I'm going to start with the current student accommodation landscape and how, COVID is obviously raising a few concerns and questions, and we're going to unpack how that will affect the student accommodation market. I'm going to take you through the three key challenges of student accommodation investing and how you can mitigate those risks. Why and what is NASFAS, NSFAS? We'll unpack that. I'm going to show you three different ways in which you can creatively finance a student accommodation deal. And these ways, two of them require none of your own money. So two ways in which you can get into student accommodation with very little, if not no money, which is quite exciting. And then I'm going to end with the repurpose strategy, which is what I think the opportunity that our current landscape and the current COVID conditions, that's the perfect strategy that you should be focusing on if you're looking at student accommodation. So let's jump in right into why student accommodation and the current landscape today. Now, why student accommodation? A couple of reasons. One, there's a great need. Right? In business, you've got supply and you've got demand. When you have too much supply, your demand falls. When you have too many properties and not enough tenants, the rate at which your tenants pay you falls, and that's the reduction in demand, right? If you have it the other way around, if you've got a high demand, low supply, your tenants can't easily find a property, which means they're willing to pay more prices to secure your unit. And that, based on your supply and demand metrics within areas, that's how they determine what your rental price will be as well as your purchase price. That's how they determine what the value is of something. Now, in South Africa, what's very clear to see is the number of or the lack of number of beds within the South African student accommodation market. Now, these are some of the stats that are floating around, and obviously no one knows what the real figure is, but some estimates are sitting around the current shortage of beds being over 500,000, meaning there's demand up here, there's supply down here. There's a lot more demand for student accommodation than there is supply of that student accommodation. The number is roughly about 500,000 beds or more. So, I mean, guys, that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of student accommodation, because whenever you've got more demand than you've got supply, you've got a business case. Okay. Second is our legacy issues. Due to a severe shortage of on-campus student housing, the majority of students are seeking off-campus housing that are often placed in unsafe and inaccessible areas. So, guys, I think This statement summarizes it. The student sector is not only facing a bed shortage, it is facing a dire transformation and innovation shortage. And what I'm going to show you at the end of this webinar, the repurpose strategy, I think is exactly the kind of transformation and innovation that our student sector needs to get. Third, there is a massive reduction in investor appetite thanks to the COVID situation. So COVID has obviously, caused a lot of hype, a lot of scare, and a lot of distressed buyers and distressed sellers as well. We're in that situation now where a lot of jobs have been lost, and a lot of investors are looking to offload assets because they need some cash flow. So this is a great time for us if you've managed your cash well. If you're maybe sitting on 150, 200, maybe even 300,000 Rand that you've been saving, you're prime in the position now to take advantage of student accommodation. I'm not saying that you have to have money to do student accommodation. I can show you one or two strategies that require very little money. But what I can say is that you've got a couple of 100,000 on you. It's a lot easier to get into the market, especially now when people are craving a bit of cash injection into the economy. So in my mind, this COVID situation and the economic, let's call it destruction that it's left behind us, is now an opportunity for those investors who are looking to come into the market at a very, very low price. This has obviously driven the value of property prices down. So this whole reduction in investor appetite, meaning that properties that used to be going for 1.5 million are now selling for 1 million. Properties that you could have maybe struggled to get R1 million offer price for, people are now accepting half a million. So because the value and the demand has so drastically decreased, the value of the property prices also, which works in our favor. Now there's a big challenge. With this opportunity comes a big challenge, and one of them is how can you do communal living with the restraints of social distancing? And to be honest, I don't think we've experienced the real effects of what COVID is going to do to our economy and to our lifestyles going forward. But I think social distancing is going to be a requirement for the next 6, if not 12 months at least, until we get a handle on this disease. And I think this pandemic has also caused a great stir in what future student accommodation should look like. So this is a big challenge. This is up for debate. I don't have the answer on how we can challenge this social distancing issue that we have, but I'm hopefully going to give you some ideas on how you can begin to navigate it. Now that we've spoken about the key challenge being social distancing, which we will unpack in the next few moments, let's look at in general what the risks are and the challenges are in student accommodation. Now, the first one is vacancies. Okay, if you've got a pen on paper there with you, maybe just make some notes, because if you can just get these 6 key risks, and whenever you're looking at a student accommodation, you cover these 6 risks and you make sure you're safe, you're going to be in a very, very strong position. Vacancies. The second is MO billing, monthly operating expense billing. Number 3 is there's some cash flow issues you have to be aware of. You have to be aware of the lending restriction, the maintenance and the repairs process, as well as the zoning. Vacancies, MO billing, cash flow issues, lending restrictions, repairs, and zoning. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's start with vacancies, okay? Now, within student accommodation, you've got an issue that your students might leave halfway through the year, right? Let's say now with this COVID situation, right? You had a student start in January, but in June, because of COVID, they're now living at home and they're no longer paying your rent. That's a massive risk when it comes to student accommodation is vacancies. The way where we usually work when we look at student accommodation is we work on a 10-month roadmap. We don't work on 12 months because we're assuming that most students are not going to rent in November and December. Most of the time they're going to go home, or they're going to have, a reason to not be in your house. So we work on 10 months. That's how you can mitigate some of these risks. And also what I tend to do is I take only second-year students and up. So when you're looking at vacancies, 2 things to remember. 1, work on 10 months, not 12 months, because students don't usually, 90% of the time, they don't rent for the full 12 months, unless they're maybe medical students or they decide to stay in your property over November, December, and not go home for the holidays. Number two, take students who are second year, third year, or up. Those students have proven themselves as being able to pass the school year, so they've got a less likely chance of, going out of the property halfway through the year. The second we've got is MO billing, monthly operating expense billing. Now, the two key costs in a student accommodation deal: water and electricity. The consumption of water and electricity are your two biggest and most dangerous costs when it comes to your monthly operating expenses. The reason is because they're variable, meaning they can change, right? So some months the students might use more heaters, more stoves, more electricity. They might take baths instead of showers, and they end up pushing your expenses and exceeding the expenses that you had budgeted for, which means that gets taken out of your profit. So when you're analyzing a student accommodation deal, I always look for at least 6 to 12 months worth of financials. So I want to see the company's financial, or the person who's owning the property. I want to see how much rent they're getting in for 12 months. I want to see how much expenses they're getting in for 12 months, so that I can create an estimate, an average, and say, on average, every month I should be getting this income and this expense, and then you can manage those expenses on a monthly basis. Another trick is to put in some electrical and water meters, which means that people have to pay upfront. It's called a prepaid meter, which means they pay before they use, which is great. That means they only get to consume whatever they've already paid for. Cash flow issues. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk to you about is NSFAS, which is a institution, I guess, that funds student accommodation, that funds students to live. Now, one of the challenges that has come out of NSFAS, especially in my experience, is that they sometimes are delayed in their first payment. So let's say you've got some students in there, some NSFAS students. They come in February, they stay March, they stay April. NSFAS sometimes struggles to pay those first few months on time. And I think it's because of maybe inefficient systems or whatever it is. So usually February, March, and April, you don't receive anything. But in May, you get paid for all of those months in 1 month. So in May, you get paid 4 months in a row, or 4 months at once, right? So it's not that you don't get paid. It's more about the timing of when that payment arrives. Now, you can imagine that this could be a tricky situation. Let's say November you don't get paid because the student isn't staying there, and December either. So January you get a student in, but they don't pay. NSFAS doesn't pay, so that's already 3 months now. Then February they don't pay. March they don't pay. They only pay in April. That means 6 months since November you haven't received any income. But in those 6 months you still have to pay your bond, your rates and taxes, your levies. You still have to pay your expenses. So the NSFAS delayed payment is one of the key risks that you have to be aware of. Simple recommendation here is to make sure that you're saving consistently. Save from January all the way through to November. Make sure that you've got a couple of months saved up, so that when NSFAS does delay your payment, you've still got the income reserves to be able to pay off your expenses without feeling that pinch every month. Lending restrictions. Now, the banks don't technically like to lend on student accommodation, or let's call it multi-people properties. The best I've gotten so far from a bank was an offer for 70% of the value of the property, where most people are getting 90, even 100% loan to value on some deals. So 70% is definitely something you have to consider. The banks do want to limit their risk. What I would say is get a home loan for 70% loan to value, and then try and bring an investor on board to bring that other 30%, or potentially some of the financing strategies that I'll show you at the end of this webinar. You can maybe use one or two of them, see if that works for you. When we're looking at repairs, now unfortunately students don't see the house as an investment or as a home. They see it as their party zone, so they want to smoke hubblies, and they want to drink, and they want to party, and they want to have pizza, and they want to have friends over. And, all of these things do start to erode your property. So what ends up happening is most people end up having to completely renovate the property every 3 or 4 years. My recommendation is make sure that you've got a weekly cleaning service. right? Just maintenance on a weekly basis is a lot more cost effective than completely renovating the property every 3-4 years. So, it's a small recommendation that's made a difference for me. Rather maintain it every week, and then you can last a lot longer without having to do a major renovation. And then finally, the zoning. Now, you need to be rezoning properties in student accommodations for multi-purpose use. Um, the common phrasing is within the Joburg municipality is it has to have commune status. So it has to be zoned as a commune in order for it to have tenants. Now, this is very important because if you don't do that, you're technically an illegal landlord or a slumlord, and they could take away your rights to actually rent this property out. So the solution there is to get accredited. Now, when we look at the zoning requirements, this is where it gets interesting with COVID, because ultimately the zoning is the zoning accreditation and requirements is going to change when social distancing becomes more and more of a norm. So what I'm going to take you through now are some of the zoning requirements that I went through about a year ago with one of my deals in Johannesburg, Brixton area. So these requirements might be slightly out of date, and they differ per municipality. So please go and consult with the town planner within your municipality. Make sure that they give you what the updated requirements are for that specific region. So please don't use what I'm going to put here now as the requirements for the whole of South Africa, because that's not the case. These are just the requirements that I had to go through in order to get my deal approved as a commune. So the first one, and probably the most important one, is how much of the ground, the land that you've got. So you've got a piece of land. How much of that land can be covered with a permanent structure? So when I was getting my zoning, 0.7, so 70% of the land can be used for permanent construction. So let me show you an example. This is the property, this is a bird's eye view of the property that I was looking at. So you can see there's a Wendy house on the top left, there's a flatlet with a bathroom, and then there's the main house. Now, what this is saying is that the white blocks here must be less than 70% of the total land mass. So you can see there's a lot of green, that's land mass. So what they've said here is there's enough land mass to fall within the criteria of being less than 70% of the total amount. Now, this is a restriction, which means you can't basically build to the sides and to the edges, and you can't try and fit as many students as you want. It's possible. But one of the transformation or one of the innovation strategies that I think is going to become very popular is containers. Now, a container is not a permanent structure, so it doesn't apply to that 70% rule. So what if you take these containers, 1, 2, maybe 3, depending on the size of the property, and you plant them inside the property as well? Now, each container can be split into 2 or 3 rooms. Again, we need to make sure that it follows the social distancing requirements that the municipality has provided. But now you're able to fit a lot more students in a relatively economically friendly kind of environment. So one of the things to remember is that 70% of your land can be a permanent building. The rest must be vacant land. But you can use containers because those aren't seen as permanent structures to increase the number of students within your property. The second requirement that I had to go through is have a minimum of 1 bath for every 4 students. Again, this might change. We'll have to see what the new social distancing norms will be. There needs to be at least 0.8 square meters of kitchen and common area per student. So that'll probably rise to maybe 1.2 or 1.5 meters squared per student, because we'll need to create bigger spaces and more, room for people to socially distance. Parking bays. Now that one for me is very ridiculous because most students don't actually have cars. So what ends up happening is you end up creating enough parking space to fulfill 0.5 parking bays per student. So let's say you've got a property of 10 students, you have to create 5 parking bays, which just takes away space, and no one's got a car. Anyway, you can sometimes get that relaxed to 0.3 parking bays per student. Depends on the municipality, depends on the demand and the supply ratios, right? So my recommendation here is go and speak to the university, go speak to your council, your municipality, go speak to your NASFAS representation in your area, find out what the zoning requirements are, apply to get your commune status, because I can tell you if you're not zoned correctly, you're in a legal dwelling and you're definitely going to pay for it. Now here's an example of a design. Now, this was done before COVID. Now, again, I don't know if this is going to follow what COVID's restrictions are. We'll have to wait and see what the government in future deems, an acceptable standard for student accommodation. But what you've got here is a very perfect example of what an efficient design would look like, right? You've got your 4 beds with 1 bath. So, it essentially fulfills that criteria. It's got a nice, comfortable kitchen space. Everybody's got their own room, their own space. There's distance between each one. I think perhaps, the common area and the kitchen area might be a bit small because, again, can the student socially distance effectively in that kind of environment? So I'm hoping that this just kind of gives you a visual design, a visual look and feel of what a potential student accommodation, small investment might look like. This could easily be a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment that you slightly restructure and repurpose to bring it into this condition, add value, and thus walk away with a decent investment. So just to get you thinking a little bit. Now, one of the big things that I was asked to talk about today is NSFAS, NSFAS, which is the National Student Funding Association in South Africa, and it's all around helping and empowering people who don't have the economical means to go to university, right? Now, why NSFAS? Because what you're starting to see, you can see here some stats from 2000 to 2015, the number of graduates that have been enrolled into university using NSFAS funding. So you can see, for example, in 2015, that's over 750,000 graduates enrolled, and almost 80,000 of them were funded by NSFAS, which is around 25%. So 1 in 4 students in 2015 was funded by NSFAS. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, that's a huge, huge vehicle. Now, the way I like to do it is I like to have some of my students from NSFAS and the other students can be private. I think having a healthy balance between the two is important. Now, let's understand exactly what NSFAS funds. Okay. If you're a university student and you use NSFAS funding, you will get an accommodation budget, usually about 3,250. So that's how much you as a student are given to accommodate or live close to the university. So that, as landlords, that's usually what we're receiving. There's a transport allowance, there's a living allowance, there's a book allowance, and then there's also personal care in residences. So that is essentially what NSFAS as an organization provides its students. The important one for us as investors is 3,250. So if we're looking at, renting our accommodation out to a student, you can budget 3,250 as more or less the average. When you're looking at a TVET, accommodation, it's slightly less. So you can see there's 24,000 Rand per annum. So that's about 2,000 Rand per month. So if you are going for the Technicons, those are the kind of allowances that are available. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail of NSFAS. There is their URL. They've got all their frequently asked questions, how they work, how you can register, how you can get students, how you can be seen as an accredited partner with NSFAS so that a student can find your accommodation. All of that is on NSFAS. Please go and check it out. They also provide you some requirements on how to become accredited. So, some great insights there as to what the requirements might be to get this kind of funding. Okay, let's move on to the financing options. Now, I wanted to spend quite a bit of time here because I think this is where a lot of people, especially in South Africa, we get stuck. We see the potential, we see the opportunity. You've probably, most of you on the call have driven past a house that would be perfect for student accommodation, but the question always begs, how am I going to finance it? How am I going to make the money to do this deal? I don't have 100,000. I don't have 10,000. I don't have any money. How can I now also join the property ladder, which has inherently been a very expensive asset class to join. And I think that's quite a shame, because property and land is a great way in which you can distribute wealth to future generations. And I think that's why we need to get as many South Africans into the property market as possible, because that's how we're going to start creating generational wealth as opposed to generational poverty. So this is a very important topic for me. And I do want us to spend significant time here so that I can try and give you some ways to also get into the property ladder. Now, the biggest challenge with student accommodation is that the banks don't particularly like lending to multi-purpose property. So let's look at the reason why, right? They will only loan most of the time 70% loan to value, because what they're scared of is the reputational damage of the property. So let's say you get a loan and you default on your payment, and the bank now repossesses that property and they have to evict the 5 students living there. What the media and what the people will see is the bank is evicting 5 innocent students, and that's what the bank is scared of, is that they're going to have the reputational damage. They tend to provide commercial interest rates as opposed to normal home loans. So, instead of getting your normal prime plus 1 interest rate, you're going to get a prime plus, 5 or 3. And it's all around brand management. So that's the challenge. That's the reason why the banks don't want to lend. So let's look at the 3 financing options that you can use today. Let's start with the equity release. Now, the equity release strategy is a very interesting one. Let me show you with a quick demonstration. So let's say that you've got a property that is valued at R1 million. You might have bought this property, 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but it's worth R1 million today. The bond, or let's call it the mortgage or the loan that you have on this property, is still 700,000. So it's worth R1 million, but your loan on that property or your outstanding bond is still 700. That means you're sitting with roughly the difference between the two, which is your equity. That's essentially how you work out equity, is value of the property minus outstanding bonds and expenses, and you're left with your equity. Now, theoretically speaking, I could approach the bank and I could say, listen, Mr. or Mrs. Banker, I have bought this property. It is now worth R1 million. I've got 300,000 Rand worth of equity in there. Can I please release that? Can I please get that out as a facility? Which basically means you're going to go to the bank and apply for a new loan, but you're going to loan at the R1 million. So let's say the bank looks at the deal and says, fantastic, looks like a great deal. It's worth R1 million. We're going to give you 100% loan to value. They're going to give you R1 million, right? The 700,000 Rand was of your bond. So you're left with now 300,000 Rand, which is cash that you can use to play with, that you can use to invest with. Okay. Now, the way that the strategy works is that you release equity from an asset. My property here is an asset. It's got some extra value in it. I'm releasing the equity from an asset. The question begs then, what qualifies as an asset? You don't need to just own property to release equity, right? Property is a great vehicle. It's a great asset that you can release equity from, but you can do it from cars. You can do it from wedding rings. Anything that has value that the bank would see as valuable, and that if they had to repossess that asset would cover whatever they've loaned you, you can bring them anything, right? So a life insurance policy, I think you can also loan against a life insurance policy, if I'm not mistaken. So you need to maybe go and speak to your banker and look at the assets that you do have. Is there something that you could, maybe release the equity out of that, use it to flip a deal, or use it to invest in property and slowly but surely recycle your money out? Okay, so an asset is anything the bank can sell to recover their initial capital. Let me show you a quick example. So here is a student accommodation block, 6-bedroom house. Okay, so the financials are great. Agreed price of 1.2. There's substantial rental of 26,000. The monthly operating expenses, including the bond, is 21. Good profit. Return on investment is fair. It's a slam dunk in terms of the financials. Now, how was the deal financed, right? R1 million loan from a commercial financer, not from a bank. At the end of this webinar, I will, at the question section, answer where you can get some commercial financiers. I know that was one of the questions. There are plenty of places that you can get commercial lending, places like Tough, places like Combined Finance. There's different avenues that you can take. 75,000 was from a credit card, right? Now, a credit card is someone else's money, right? It's the bank's money. My only recommendation here is that when you're using your credit card, make sure it's for investments, for your education, or for property, not for luxury or lifestyle. And then 200,000 was an equity release from the primary residence. So the million from the bank, 75,000 from the credit card, and 200,000 from an equity release gave this person enough financing to buy this property. Okay, so that's an example of how you can use equity release, right? It's another form of accessing money. Now, one of the greatest things is it doesn't have to be your asset. Sometimes people don't realize is maybe you've got an uncle or an aunt or a friend or a business partner or a colleague that has a paid off house, and that house is not bringing them any kind of return. Why not approach them with a proposal and say, let's release R1 million of equity off your property. Let's invest in the student accommodation. We're going to make a 15% return on investment. So let's reuse the money from this deal, from your paid off property, which is not giving you the return that you want. Let's invest it into the student accommodation. So an equity release is a great way in which you can start looking at investing in property with other people's money. The second is the rent to rent. Now, I know that some of you have been on our workshop before, and I'm sure you've seen the rent to rent or something similar. So please bear with me if you've seen this before. But for those of you who haven't seen it, the rent to rent strategy, we call it the cash flow cow with almost zero money required, and that's exactly what it is. It's a very, very exciting strategy. So let me quickly show you how it would work. Let's imagine that you are here on the left-hand side, and you go and find a property in a town close to university. I'm just going to use the example of Brixton in Johannesburg, which is a kilometer away from the university. Let's say you find a nice rundown old house. It's got 5 bedrooms, and you go to the landlord and you say, I'd like to rent this property from you, and I'm going to rent it for 10,000 Rand per month. Right? And then what you've done, which is very clever, is you've only taken one of the rooms. The other 4 bedrooms are now empty. So what you do is you approach 4 students and you sublet to them. So they then become your tenants, you become the landlord, and you rent it to them for 20,000 Rand. So your expenses are 10,000 Rand you're paying towards the landlord. That's the rent you're paying towards the landlord. And then you're subletting to 4 other students who are essentially paying for you to stay there, plus an additional 10,000 Rand. Now, obviously, this deal sounds incredible. There's a couple of things you have to be aware of. One, the owner has to be made aware of the situation. It has to be clearly documented that you will be subletting. So the owner has to be aware of it. Number 2, it's very hard to find. I have a lot of students that are looking for these kind of deals because it requires very little money to get started. The question is, where are you going to find this? Because it can be quite tricky to find. So that's the rent-to-rent strategy. I have recorded a couple of other videos and some articles around rent-to-rent in more detail. Go check them out. A great strategy for you to get started with because it requires very little capital. It does, however, require a lot of time and a lot of patience. And finally, the Alienation Land Act, the ALA. Now, this is a very, very interesting financing option, and one that only the elite and the wealthiest of the wealth in South Africa are aware of. Most people that I've spoken to have never ever heard of this process, and it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. It's quite a complex process to explain, so I'm going to try and go as slowly as I can through this. The first thing to note about this type of strategy is it's not about owning the property. It's about controlling and owning the cash flow. Okay. Now, cash flow, just for those of you who don't know, cash flow is our jargon. It's the word for profit. So your monthly income minus your monthly expenses equals your profit. We just call that cash flow. So another word for this Alienation Land Act is called the lease option. And in order to do a lease option, you need to have a distressed house, a distressed seller, and a bloody good attorney. Okay, so distressed house, so a rundown house, a motivated seller, and a good attorney. Okay, let me explain the process of this the strategy. So first of all, let's say that you find a house. It's in 2015, and you agree that the value of the property in 2015 is 1 million Rand. So that's what you've decided with the landlord. You guys have looked at your reports and you've said, this property is worth R1,000,000. The owner's also told you that the current bond repayments are 10,000 Rand, and this owner is motivated, right? This owner just wants to get out of this deal. They can't afford the 10,000 Rand per month. Maybe they've just lost their job. They can't sell the property because it's in really bad condition. So this person is in a very between a rock and a hard place. Let's put it that way. So they can't sell the property because it's in bad condition. They can't keep paying off the bond because they're running into debt. This is the opportunity for a lease option. So what you can then say to the owners, you can say, I'm not going to buy your property, but I'm going to take control of your property for a period of time. And what that means is when I take control of that property, I have access to the property. I can renovate the property. I can rent out the property. I will essentially own, but I don't own. I control the property for, let's call it 10 years. Now, this is great for the owner because the owner now doesn't have to worry about the 10,000 Rand per month anymore, right? The owner is basically, you've said to him, I'm paying off your debt every month. What's good for you is you don't have to buy the property. You don't need to come up with that R1,000,000 to actually purchase the property. So what you're doing is you're taking control of the property. You go in, you invest a bit of money to renovate it. So you might have to put in 100, 120,000 Rand to renovate the property, but then you rent it out. And you need to make sure, obviously, you need to do your due diligence, but you need to rent that out for higher than whatever the bond is. So the power here, ladies and gentlemen, is that you don't have to come up with the financing for R1,000,000. You don't have to buy the property. All you have to do is you have to agree in a written contract with the owner to say, I'm going to control your property for the next however many years. And during that period, I am able to rent out the property and I will pay all your monthly expenses on your behalf. Now, another powerful thing about the lease option, and that option is the key word there, not obligation, option. You can state in your contract that over the period of time that you're controlling this property, you can purchase it at any time. So you have essentially the option to buy within your period of time while you're renting out the property. Okay, now let's imagine, right? Let's imagine we decide to do that. And in 2025, so we've decided now to do this lease agreement for 10 years. The end of 2025, that's 10 years later, the lease agreement now comes to an end. We have the option to buy, not the obligation, we can choose to buy. Now, let's say in 2025, the value of the property is actually 2 million. You get to buy it at the price that you agreed in 2015. So what you get to do is you're not going to buy it at the 2 million that it's currently worth. You're going to buy it at the value you decided in 2015, which is R1,000,000, which means you're buying a 2 million Rand house for 1 million Rand. And what you can then do is you can go refinance with the bank, get all of your money, if not more, out, still rent it out, still have a cash flow cow, and maybe you walk away with 500,000 Rand profit because you bought at the right time. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Alienation Land Act. It is taking over someone's bond for a period of time. You need a really good attorney to set up a lease contract, which allows you to lease from the owner for a period of time with the option to buy at whatever the value is that you deem fair today. That is the power of the lease option strategy, or in South Africa, we call it the Alienation Land Act. You don't have to own the property, but you want to own the cash flow. So let me show you a quick lease option example. This is my first investment that I did in the UK. Because I didn't have the kind of financing or capital required to invest in the UK, I decided that the only logical, step was to do a lease option. So this is the property on the outside. Okay, this is the property on the inside. I'm standing there with the builder. We're just going through the room. There's the bathroom on the bottom left there, and then there's a room. There's a kitchen as well. So you can see the property is in really bad condition. So I had to come in, I had to renovate the property, and then once it was in good condition, I could rent it out. The financials were simple. The monthly rental for this deal is £425. My monthly bond, so the bond that the owner is currently paying is £81. I've taken that over. That's now my expense. So you can see I'm making 425. My monthly bond, which is usually my biggest amount, is only £81, which is fantastic. I also have to pay all of these other expenses. So you, as the landlord, the controlling landlord, will also have to pay levies, rates and taxes, maintenance, management, all of those expenses are still going to sit on your shoulders. So you need to make sure that you run the numbers beforehand, that the deal makes financial sense before, you get too excited. So my monthly profit or my cash flow on this deal is £256 per month, ROI of 34%. All I had to pay was about 80,000 Rand to renovate that property. And I am now a landlord in the UK. And I think there's a lot of people on this call today that could maybe muster up 80 to 100,000 Rand. I don't think you would have thought that you could be a UK or an international landlord with just 100,000 Rand, but that's the power of the Alienation Land Act. So that opportunity is here in South Africa. What's great about this opportunity as well is that the banks aren't able to stop the process from proceeding. So let's say that you're taking over the loan from a landlord, but your credit score is not great. From my understanding, we might just need to double check this with an attorney, but my understanding is that even if you don't have the right credit score, the bank can't stop this process from happening. So if you are blacklisted or if you do have a bad credit score, this might be an option for you to take into account. Please go and do your own research. Please just speak to a property attorney and make sure that you're getting sound legal advice. I do stand corrected if that's not the case. I just wanted to quickly show you this video. So this video is just showing you essentially what the property and the renovations look like. So this is me standing outside the property. If you remember, the property looked like it was in terrible condition. So this is just what we have done to it. So you can see that we've painted the sides of the walls with a nice light gray. We've put some light gray carpets on, white finishings, so white rails, and here's one of the rooms. So you can see, it looks quite clean. It's quite simple. We went for a low-cost gray kind of look and feel. Just keep it nice and modern. Here's another one. So this is where the second student stays. So there's one student in that room and then another student in this room. It used to be a lounge, but we've now converted it to a student flat. And then here you've got the bathroom. Okay, nice and simple. With just 100,000 Rand, we were able to pretty much put this property back at full market value, And then here's the kitchen where one of the builders is just explaining what worked and what the next steps are. So that's just to give you a little bit of a sense of, that this is real, that we actually do renovations. We go and we add value to a property, and that's how you're able to get the good deals. So that's the Alienation Land Act. If this interests you, please, please, please go do your Google research. Just type in Alienation Land Act in South Africa. Go read the acts. Go read the legal documentations that are out there. Maybe this is another avenue for you to access financing. So those are our financing options. I also have created several videos on how to use investors financing, public financing. Go check out my YouTube channel. All of my videos are there. They're for free. They always will be. Go check them out. Now, I just wanted to end with what I believe South Africa's student accommodation is desperately calling for. It is not just lacking in beds, it is lacking in transformation and innovation. Now, this photo for me is a great example of what a little bit of creative thinking and repurposing can do to transform something into something great. And what I believe is that right now the opportunity in student accommodation is in buying older houses in and around the university and then renovating them and repurposing them for student accommodation. I feel, and then there's a lot of research going out there to show that currently the student accommodation sector is lacking private finance. It's lacking private companies coming in and investing in this market. So I believe that us as private investors have an opportunity to come in, transform, and innovate our market. So let me show you an example. Right, here is another property in Brixton. Now, this is the perfect kind of opportunity. It's an old house. It's big. It's 5 bedrooms, old house. This kind of property that's currently being used as a family house can very easily and very quickly be repurposed into something that students will use. So, converting the 6 rooms into 9 rooms. Right, that's the first step. Include prepaid electricity, include fiber and Wi-Fi, rezone to commune, and modernize the property. That is going to repurpose and transform this building into something that students of the future will want to be investing in and want to be living in. Okay, so let me just show you a quick high-level visual. This property hasn't been completed yet, so I can't show you the after photos. But essentially, this is currently how it is. There's 2 separate kitchens. There is a lounge. There's a couple of rooms. There's some fireplace room. There's a spare room. There's a patio. And then there's also a flatlet at the back of the house. Now, what we can do is, first of all, we can subdivide that flatlet. Is more than spacious enough. Even with social distancing requirements coming in, there's more than enough space there. So a great thing for you to do is, when you're looking at an old house, can you put in multiple rooms? Can you put in a couple more beds? How can you put, instead of 6 students, how can you put 10 or 15 or how can you maybe scrap the land and develop something? How can you put containers in? You've got to be thinking all the time, how can I add value? Golden rule of property investing is, 1, you've got to take action. Number 2, you've got to add value. What we're also going to do is we're going to make the 1 bathroom an ensuite bathroom. So you can see room 5, because that bathroom is so big, we can now break it up so that room 5 has a private bathroom, meaning that room 5 can be rented out for more than the other rooms, right? Now we're increasing the value of just 1 room. The fireplace and the spare room can be converted into other rooms. And again, we ensuite in the 1 bathroom. The patio can even be changed into a room. Now, I do have a lot of students in this 1 building, which could be a risk from a social distancing point of view. I have to get my town planner to confirm that. Of course, guys, we need a power team, right? You need a good attorney, you need a good estate agent, a good builder, you need a good town planner. All of these laws and regulations are changing all the time. You just need to make sure that you've got the right team members around you to give you that advice that you can move forward with. But here, it's just a simple example of how a little bit of innovation, a little bit of transformation can change your average deal into a great deal. And the deal here is going to provide 4,150 Rand per month in passive profit, which is a return of 33%, just with a little bit of tinkering, a bit of information, a bit of transformation. So that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the content section. We've looked at the current student accommodation, the landscape, that there's a great need. There's a oversupply, over demand, under supply currently happening. COVID will impact the social distancing norms and obviously the zoning requirements, so we'll need to keep up to date with that. We've looked at the 6 different risks and challenges in student accommodation that if you look after them, you fix them, you should have a good deal. Why and how to use NSFAS, so what do they do and how to use them. We looked at the equity release, the rent-to-rent, and the Alienation Land Act as our 3 ways to creatively finance. And we also looked at the repurposing strategy. Now, just quickly before we go into the questions section, we have had a lot of questions about getting a property coach. And for those of you who have attended our workshops before, you know that we always end with these slides. And it's all around how to go to the next step. So you might be here for the first time. You might be a savvy investor who's already got a few properties. And you might be just looking for someone like myself or one of our experienced coaches to, review your portfolio or help you to get started in your property journey. So our property coaching is essentially a 6-session package. So we meet with you every 2 weeks for about 12 weeks. And over these different sessions, we will discuss your financial freedom plan and how you can get there. We'll look at number analysis, so how to work out your return on investment, return on equity, gross yield, rate of return, all the different financial metrics and what they mean. We'll look at area research, how to use TPN, Lightstone, and all these different tools to determine if an area makes financial sense, how to raise and use OPM, which is other people's money, legals and structures, so OTPs, companies, when and how to buy. And then finally, you get access to our power team, our attorneys, our town planners, our architects, whoever you need access to. So quickly, we have 4 coaches. This is Neti. You can see he specializes in creative finance. We've got Clinton, who's specializes in student accommodation. We've got Maungo. She specializes at back-to-backs. And then myself, I've got a specialty in multi-lets. Happy to send you our biographies if that's of interest to you. What I just quickly will do here, put the call to action. So if you do want to know more about our program, just click that button that says contact Lawrence for property coaching. If you want to know more about our coaches, we do have 2 options going at the moment. We've got our starter package, which is 4 sessions of one-to-one coaching plus 6 months free to our innovative My Property App tool, which costs $12,997. And then we've got the professional package, which is the full 6 sessions plus 12 months free access at 20,000 Rand. So those are 2 options. If you are interested, please click that button below. Just input that form, and then I'll be in contact with you tomorrow. Just a reminder that action doesn't change anything, or knowledge doesn't change anything, only action does. Lastly, just before we get onto the questions, I have also had a few people querying why we're charging for coaching and why we're charging so much. And I think that's a very fair question. I've been doing this investing thing now for 7-8 years. I've paid hundreds of thousands of rands in terms of getting my knowledge and my experience. I've been coached by some of the great property minds in South Africa, and I've been working with Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad team for many years. So I think the reason why we charge for coaching is, one, because we've got the experience and the qualifications to make you a successful investor, and that time that we're going to be giving to you and the value we're going to be giving to you is worth a lot. Now, we also charge for the coaching because the coaching is not about education. The education is free, right? If you're looking for education, just go to my channel, Lawrence Bull, search there. I've got videos every single week that I'm adding. I'm not scared to share knowledge. You guys can see that being on this course now. I'm not someone who's going to hold back knowledge. If you're looking for knowledge, go look at the YouTube channel. All the videos are there. All of them will be free and will always be free. Why we charge for coaching is for people who are serious about being held accountable. So if you want me to sit with you one-on-one and push you into making a good financial decision and hold you accountable and introduce you to my power team, yes, I'm going to charge for that because I've worked very hard to build that up. If you want the knowledge, it's all free on the internet. That's not why we do coaching. It's not to teach you. It's to hold you accountable to taking action, which truly changes your life. So if you want to know more, click that button at the below, add in that form. I will then send you an email tomorrow or potentially on Monday, depending how many requests we get. Alternatively, you can also just email me directly, lawrence@housebuyers.coza, with the subject line coaching. So lawrence@housebuyers.coza, subject coaching. Once you do email me, I will then send you a biography of all of our different coaches. So you'll see mine and Leti there on the screen. Just gives you a little sense of who we are, what our expertise is, and a recent deal that we did. Lastly, some links and questions. So if you've got any questions about our app, how to use it, how to make use of it, or how to enroll, please email support@mypropertyapp.online. Go check out our website or our app. It's there, mypropertyapp.online. Go check out our blog. We put in update that blog with articles and videos on a regular basis. And then finally, you can email me directly if you're looking for investments or coaching services. Fantastic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to answer 5 of the top questions that are currently here. Okay. First of all, first question here by Butumelo. Which companies are best to approach for student accommodation funding? Okay, great question. I would say approach TUHF, TUHF. They do urban financing for developers. What's great is that they will do about 70% loan to value, but they've also got another partner of theirs. I think it's called the Ntuku Fund, something like that. But they also provide additional bridging finance. Another person to potentially look at is Combined Finance and Sentinel Homes. I'd also potentially look at maybe APSA. Go look at APSA's buy-to-let product. I know that APSA's been quite innovative in what their lending options are. So I would try those avenues. We've got Quena that asked, involving NSFAS into my student accommodation investments. So Quena, I think great opportunity to use NSFAS. Please go and look at the website to make sure you understand what their requirements are. Work on roughly 3,250 Rand per month per student. They work on 10 months. So they're not going to give you 12 months rent. They're going to give you 10 months rent, and make sure that you're managing your cash flow. Because remember, those first few months they don't pay you, you still have to pay your expenses. So yes, I would recommend using NSFAS, but I'd also recommend that you try and get a couple of private students, because sometimes private students will pay more and they also might pay 12 months. Okay, Sakile, buying land and building student accommodation or buying ready built apartments? which option is best for a beginner group of investors. So Sakile, if you're a beginner investor, I would definitely say buying an already built apartment or an already built house and then repurposing it to student accommodation is where you should start. When you start developing, so buying land and developing a property, you're going to very much struggle to raise financing unless you've got lots of capital. If you and your partners have all the cash to do the deal, development is an opportunity. But if you need to raise financing, rather buy an already built property. Okay, let's see here. Can I build cottages for student accommodation during this time? Yes, you can. I think what you just need to do is go speak to a town planner within your municipality and make sure that you do the right requirements, zoning requirements, and you meet all their different standards to have a student accommodation. But yeah, you can definitely get started during this time of COVID. Let's see, Butamelo, is it good to buy property for student accommodation with COVID pandemic? It's a good question. I think right now it's a great time to be a buyer because most of the properties are highly distressed. Most of the sellers now are selling well below market value because they're motivated to sell. There is a bit of risk, obviously. We don't know what the market's going to do, so you might buy now and the property market goes even lower. What I can say, though, is just from a financial point of view, buying low is always a good idea. And right now, people are selling low. So I would definitely consider it to be a good time to be an investor. Okay, I am just going to answer one more question from Katlejo here. With a rent-to-rent strategy, how does one pass the agent and get in touch with the landlord directly? I often find that the agents are the barrier. Yes, and then what would motivate the landlord to agree? So first of all, if there is an agent involved, I would say you've got to probably walk away because the rent-to-rent strategy is not going to work with an agent. Because the agent, that's what the agent is doing. The agent is essentially playing the rent-to-rent manager. They're finding other tenants to sublet to. So if there is an agent, you can try and go past the agent to get directly to the owner. I would say that's risky because you're going behind that person's back and they're going to find out and then you're going to get a bad reputation. What would motivate the landlord to agree to a rent-to-rent? They need to have they have to be really irritated with the current situation. So maybe they've got a house that's currently being rented by people who are just not paying on time, or maybe there's such a hassle because they have to constantly maintain the property. So, Katlejo, it's a hard question to answer. I would say you have to find someone who's highly, highly motivated because otherwise they would just keep the property and rent it out themselves. That's what's hard about this strategy, is finding the opportunity. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are still 13 questions here. I will answer them in about 15, 20 minutes and create a recording of each question. What you can then do is you can log back in later on when it's convenient for you and you can just listen to the answer for your specific question. I try and only answer, 5 questions in a sitting because I don't want to run well over 7. I understand that this is your evening. It's a Thursday evening. We appreciate you being here. So thank you very much for being a part of this. I will answer all 13 questions in the next few minutes, and you can come in and just listen to your question. Thank you so much for joining us again. Stay safe, stay healthy, be there for each other. And until next time, happy investing. Thanks so much.